Can you guys see this? See my screen?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So this is the cover letter workshop following up to my resume workshop I did last week. So that's been shared on LinkedIn, and I'll include this one as well. It's just a link to my website where I'm housing them. So if you guys want to go back and look at anything, you can. So quick agenda. I'll just do a brief overview of who I am, and then we'll go over best practices, do's and don'ts. I'll show you some what I think are bad and good examples. I'll do a quick overview of what you can include in your content, and then just some general tips and tricks and resources for applying to jobs. So this is me. I'm Katie LaBranche. I'm a freelance digital media strategist. I started my company last year just to help local businesses with their websites and social media presence. I'm also the knowledge base admin for Rosetta Stone. Previously, I was an implementation specialist with Rosetta Stone, and before that, I was a content specialist with a small local company. I have a BA in communication technology and culture, and then a master's in digital media strategy. And just a couple fun facts about me. I love dogs, cheese, and houseplants, and I try to keep the houseplants alive. My dogs are fairly calm right now, but they might not be the whole time. So I apologize if you hear them running around. And then just my contact info if you need it. So a few best practices for cover letters. Just like your resume, you want your cover letter to be on one page. I put matchy matchy, so you want to use the same style or template as your resume, just so it's coordinated. And then spelling is really important. So one tip I have is that you can read sentences backward to catch mistakes, because when you read a sentence as you normally do, your brain will automatically fix small mistakes that you probably wouldn't catch. And then formatting, you want to use bullets and short paragraphs. So 3 to 4 sentences max. You don't want a huge wall of text. They're going to be reading a lot of resumes and cover letters, so you want it to be almost skimmable. And then you want to avoid fluff. So be polite and explain what you do well, but don't over explain or go into tangents that aren't related. And then add personality. You want to write how you would speak, but still keep it professional. So don't use a ton of jargon or words that you wouldn't normally use just in a conversation. So do's and don'ts. Address the hiring manager if possible, and I'll go over some tips for this in a little bit. You want to mention the position and the company that you're applying for, and this just makes it obvious that you're not sending some generic cover letter to a ton of different companies. You can use a lot of the same content in the cover letters that you send to different companies, but you want to go and switch it up a little bit so that it's specific to the role that you're applying for. You want to think of it as required. So some applications will put that the cover letter is optional, but just in my research from what I'm seeing, you want to include it if there's a space for it. It'll show that you're serious about the position. It'll put you above the people who don't include a cover letter, and it will just give them more insight into whether you're the best fit for the job or not. You want to show how you're unique or the best fit for that job, and then vary your sentence structure. So this means look at the length of your sentences and have some short sentences, some long, some medium, just to break up the text a little bit. It'll make it easier and more interesting to read. And then know your audience. So I'm sure you guys have been looking at job listings, and sometimes the personality or the culture of the company really comes out in job listings. Like in my research, I was looking at some the other day that it had memes in it, like in the job listing. So you can tell that's a fun company, and they would probably appreciate some extra fun in your cover letter. Whereas if the company seems super serious, you want to tone down your cover letter a little bit to fit that audience. And then always send it as a PDF, not as a Word or Google Doc. And so for don'ts, don't just repeat your entire resume in paragraph form. You can mention the skills and experience that you have on your resume, but you want to include some information that they couldn't find just by reading your resume. And then, like I said, don't just send the same generic cover letter to everybody. And then don't only list the skills covered in the job description. It's important that you have those skills that are listed under their requirements, but try to think about other skills that you have that could be useful. Like when I applied for the implementation specialist position at Rosetta Stone, I hadn't really managed clients before. I had worked with a few as a liaison, but my main skill was writing. So I made sure to include that in my cover letter, and that was actually a big part of the interview, as they were looking for somebody to help with email templates going out from the team. So I think that's a big part of the reason I got the job, is because they saw the other skills that I had and noticed how they could be useful for the team's needs that weren't necessarily on the job description. So here are a few bad examples, and this is just mostly focusing on the format. So you can see the one on the left is too much. The font isn't great for one, but also just there's too much text. If you look closely, you can see that almost every paragraph starts with I. So you want to vary how you start your sentences and your paragraphs. Yeah, it doesn't stand out. It's not unique. And the one in the middle is a little bit better. It probably matches their resume template, but it's not formatted completely correct. You want to include certain things, like I think the date's on there, but you want to include like the company name and the address. So we'll go over that in a minute as well. But you can also see that those paragraphs are really big. They're probably 6, 8, 10 sentences, and you want to keep them to 3 to 5 just so it's easier to read. And then the one on the right is pretty much the exact opposite of these two. It's too little information. There's way more room to describe that they're like why they're interested in this job and how they're a good fit for it. Sorry, Hazel is rolling around behind me. Hey. So these are some good examples. You can see that the template is nice and probably matches their resume. So they have their name and their contact information at the top. On the left side, you'll put the hiring manager name and the company name, and then the address for the company. You'll address them, have your cover letter in short paragraphs, usually like 3 to 5 short paragraphs, and then sincerely your name. And what the one on the left and the one on the right did is they included their name in a script font, sort of like a signature, and you can do that, but I've also included a resource at the end where you can create a digital signature and download it as a small image to include on your cover letter, and I think that adds a nice personal touch as well. And from my resume workshop and the resumes I've been reviewing, most of you guys know I suggest a 2-column setup for your resume just to help break it up. So this example on the right is what it might look like if that 2-column setup includes your contact information in the left column. It's okay to include it this way on your cover letter too. It might take up some extra space, so you could always reformat the cover letter template a little bit so that has your name at the top, and then to the right of it have your contact information, just in case you don't like the look of this or if you need more room for your cover letter content.
Katie, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I see sometimes you have the hiring manager's name.
Mhm.
When you're kind of just, applying to jobs online, how do you track down the hiring manager's name?
It's a great question. I'm about to cover that, so it's
Oh,
perfect timing.
perfect.
Yeah. So here's just the general format of how your cover letter should go. So you'll have your header, and then the date, the employer's contact info, so name, title, company name and address, and then the greeting. So you'll put dear name. And in this little box over to the right, if you're applying on somewhere like LinkedIn, usually it will have the hiring manager's name on the listing. But if you don't know it and you really can't find it, it's okay to put like dear hiring manager or dear social media hiring manager, dear customer service manager, that sort of thing. But if it's that difficult for you to find, it's probably difficult for other people too. So, what I recommend is don't be afraid to call or email the company if you can find an email for someone in the company, like in HR. Um, Reach out to them and ask who the hiring manager is. It just kind of explain, like, hey, I'm applying for this position, I'm writing a cover letter, and I want to know who I should address it to. And usually they'll tell you, and that way you can address it directly to the person. But it will also help you stand out because they'll be getting a bunch of cover letters that say, dear hiring manager, but you actually know their name, and they'll probably find out that you reached out to get that information, which just to me shows a little bit of extra effort. Does that make sense, Cam?
Yes, that does.
Okay. I know it's not like the most fun thing to do, call, email all these companies, but it will help you stand out in the end, especially if it's a company that you really want to work for.
Yeah, I'm just kicking myself in the butt now because I definitely applied to a job and that I really wanted and didn't do this.
Well, I mean, it's not going to make or break you. I just think it's a nice touch. Um, I did see some examples that have dear sir or madam, which you can do that, but it's a little bit formal and impersonal. So I would just try to avoid something like that if you can. But if you can't find their name, just be as specific as possible about the company name or the department, that sort of thing in your greeting. And you can just exclude it from the contact info up here. So just include the company name and address, but you could exclude the name and title from their contact info if you don't have it.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then, so for the body, you'll have a really short info that you want to grab their attention, introduce yourself, and mention the role or company. So just think about all these people are applying and they're reading, they have to go through and read these cover letters. So you want to include something in here that makes them want to keep reading. And I'll show you guys a good example of this in a second. I'll kind of break out how they did it. And then for the body, just 3 to 5 short paragraphs describing your experience, skills, achievements. You want to include numbers in here as best you can, like I increased this by X%. And you can show like concrete examples of your skills. And then just a nice closing, like I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for your time and consideration. I'll reach back out in this amount of time to follow up. And you'll see that in a second in the example. And then you'll put sincerely your name and your signature if you want to. So if you guys want to quickly read through this or come back to the slide deck later and look it over, I just found this online and I think it's really well written and interesting, especially if you've ever written a cover letter or you've looked through cover letters and you can see how quickly they become pretty boring. So, like the first paragraph is just an interesting intro with personality. You can see it's kind of cute. She put, as a quick thinking online native who's obsessed, Yes, obsessed with the Scatterplot app. I was thrilled to see your listing for the social media manager position at Scatterplot Entertainment Co. So it says what position and company she's interested in, but I just like that first part of the sentence where she already takes the chance to describe herself. In the second paragraph, you'll go over your experience and skills, which she also does really well. I think this is for a social media position. So she's just explaining the metrics, A/B tests, different campaigns that she's run, and how she's been successful running those campaigns. And then in the third paragraph, you can include relevant examples, whether general examples, or I recommend getting more specific like she did. So she increased user engagement by over 140% on average. She also gives a example of where she tweeted something that got over 60,000 interactions and BuzzFeed noticed it. So those are just good examples to show how successful she could be for them. And then this fourth paragraph, not completely necessary, but it can kind of help lead you into your closing. So instead of just going straight from relevant examples to thanks, you can just take another opportunity here to describe how your skills could help them specifically. And then the last paragraph will be your thanks, and you can mention a follow-up if you want to do that. If you do mention a follow-up, make sure you set yourself a reminder to follow up. But if you don't want to do that, just say, I'm available to talk at your soonest convenience and can't wait to hear from you, or something like that. Just letting them know that you're expecting them to reach out soon. Does that all make sense? Does anyone have questions at this point?
Makes sense. Very good.
Cool. All right. And then, so tips and tricks, I went over these in the resume workshop too. But while you're applying, think about LinkedIn endorsements and recommendations. So you can give and request them. I found that when you give endorsements and recommendations, that people are likely to give them back in return. So you can just go and endorse people for their skills or write a short recommendation. And on the recommendation section of someone else's profile, there's a little button to request a recommendation. So I would recommend doing one for them first before you send a request, and try to send requests to people that you work with regularly who you know would be comfortable writing one for you and have good things to say. And then you want to engage on LinkedIn. Like I'm sure you guys have seen all the people coming out of the woodwork to help you find jobs. That's where you guys found me as well. So as you can see, like you can make pretty good connections on LinkedIn. You want to network your ass off. And then do research on each company just to make sure that your skills match with what they need, but also that you connect with their culture and values and that it's a place that you'd want to actually work. And then, like I said, just don't mass send generic resumes and cover letters. And then while interviewing, you guys know these, so just include these in here just in case. Reply in a timely manner. You want to be transparent and professional, but also be yourself. And then notify your references. So even if someone has agreed to be your reference in the past, I just like to let them know, hey, I'm applying for this new job. I would send them the link to the description just so that they can read it over and sort of think about or be prepared to answer questions that are specific to that job when the recruiter or manager does reach out. And then I would recommend sending thank you emails or even cards in the mail if you know they're in the office and you can reach them. It just adds a nice personal touch. And then do not burn bridges. So when applying or even when interviewing, if they ask you about your past companies, just try to think of a nice way to talk about it, because if you ever tried to go back to that company, it could come back to haunt you. But also, if you're talking bad about your previous company to possibly a future employer, it could tell them that you would do the same thing to them in the future, and they probably wouldn't hire you. And then resources. So I have a link to templates on Etsy here, which I always recommend. A lot of the templates come as a zip file that includes a resume template, a matching cover letter template, and some of them even include a template where you can put down your references if a company asks for that. You could also, if you're familiar with InDesign, design your resume there, especially if you're in a graphic design field or something more creative. I recommend creating your own just because it gives you an extra chance to show off your design skills. But Adobe does have templates that you could download to sort of start with or play with. And then here's the link to that digital signature creator. And I tried it out and I didn't download any viruses, so that site is pretty safe. And then for job searching and networking, I just recommend LinkedIn. You can set alerts for companies or like job types that you want, and it'll email them to you however often you want. Look on LinkedIn. You can set alerts on Google Jobs as well. And then if anyone is in the support space, I recently found this group called Support Driven, and you could join their Slack room called Job Board, where you can either post that you're looking for a job or you can browse through other jobs that people are listing. And they're not always support jobs that these people are posting. They're just in the support space and could be posting jobs for other departments in their company. And then my last recommendation is to email companies you like. So when I first got out of college, I kept applying to jobs, but I didn't hear back from any of them. And I was sending a lot of generic resumes and cover letters, so that probably had something to do with it. But I ended up just looking for companies in the area that I liked. And even if they didn't have an open position, I would just send an email on the contact form on their website and let them know, like, I like your website, I'm a writer, I'm looking for a position if you have anything coming available soon. And one of them actually reached out to me and said, hey, we haven't posted this job yet. Our writer just left actually, though. Is this something you'd be interested in? And they had me come in for an interview, and that was my first job out of college. So you never know if a company you really like will be hiring soon. And it also just shows your interest in them and how serious you are about finding a job with them. So that's it. You guys can unmute and ask questions now if you want, or you can email me or message me on LinkedIn. I'm still reviewing resumes, and I can take a look at cover letters too once you get drafts done. I'm not an expert, but I'm a pretty good copy editor. So if you guys need anything, just let me know.
Katie, what are your thoughts on pictures on like your resume and cover letter? Because I've seen some templates that have like a headshot, which I personally think is cool, but I'm also like, I don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah, so I typically recommend avoiding them unless you're a model or an influencer or something where your looks are going to add to the job, just because you want to think that people won't judge you based on what you look like, but it's just even subconsciously it could affect your application. So
Okay.
I would recommend against it. And if they want to know what you look like, they could look you up on LinkedIn too.
Okay,
but I would
perfect.
recommend against it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think it looks cool, but then I'm just like, I don't want people looking at me either.
Yeah. No, and those templates are really nice. But I just think about it like you don't want someone to be like, oh, I don't like her hair, and then they don't hire you for some reason, which is a stupid reason, and you probably wouldn't want to work for them anyway. but you just don't want to give them any sort of reason to knock you out that isn't related to your experience.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question. When it comes to references, is that something you add on the cover letter, or is that a separate sheet? And what exactly would you add or include in that?
So you could include it in your cover letter, but you probably won't have space. Some applications that I've seen ask for the references right up front, or they'll ask for references later in the application process. But normally what I include is just the person's name and their title, phone number and email address. And you could like quickly explain at the bottom, like how you know that person.
Okay.
Like previous manager, mentor, professor, classmate, whatever. But you want to try and pick professional references.
Okay. Makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else, guys? All right. I hope this was helpful. If you think of any questions later, you can always reach out to me.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is great. Thank you.
Of course,
Thank you,
guys.
Katie.
Yeah.
Really good, Katie. Thanks
Have
a
a
lot.
good night.
Okay, you too.
Everyone
Bye-bye.
take care.